Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Rochester, or at least the minister's home of First UU Church. It is an act of love that we are recording our services from home and bringing it to your home. There is something that, while it feels distant, it need not be in the same space. There is a connectedness that happens that we're sharing in this experience of staying home, as well as a sense of warmth of being in each other's homes during this time. So I welcome you to what was formerly the guest room in your minister's home, which is now the First UU's remote chapel, something that my wife assures me will be temporary. But in all seriousness, it is important to stay connected, and we're glad to stay connected in this way. For over 150 years, our church has been a church of open minds and loving hearts, celebrating sources of wisdom from many sources, many spiritual paths, many identities, all of which help us live lives of compassion, justice, and love. During the service online, there are many ways to engage with your church. You can light a chalice in your home and join the actions of our chalice lighting that we use with families and children each week. We hope to have a family each week record that. You can post comments throughout the service if you're watching on Facebook, names of loved ones that you're holding during the meditation, or hopes or blessings to others. And anytime during or after the service, you can donate to our offering at the giving link with this post, which is also on our website. And you can give to the general offering or designate funds if you want to donate to the Human Needs Fund, which is emergency financial assistance for members or friends. You can also submit your pledge if you haven't done so yet to commit to the future and vibrancy of this church. And beyond the service, you can stay connected in a variety of ways. We have an online coffee hour Sundays at 11:15. Follow the Zoom link for that, as well as a Wednesday night forum every Wednesday at 6:30. This coming Wednesday is with member and musician Jane Foote. You don't want to miss it, for an evening of reflections on songwriting, as well as hearing some of her songs from her new CD. So you can join us Wednesday night at 6:30. You can visit our website or check your e-news for all the updated links, program or building updates, and opportunities to offer or receive care or assistance in a variety of ways. So today we're grateful for those who have been trying out new technologies at home, some for the first time, to adapt in all the ways we're adapting. And mostly know that your church is holding you. It's holding all of us. There's a love holding you and this community. I invite you to rest in that love. Take a deep breath. It's good to be together.
This is the Unitarian Universalist Church. This is the Church of the Flaming Chalice. This is the Church of the Open Mind. This is the Church of the Loving Heart, where friends come together and share.
went to nursing school 30 years ago in Oakland, California. One of the first classes I took was called The Professional Practice of Nursing in the 20th Century, or something along those lines. The class was a basic indoctrination to the profession of nursing. In the class, the instructors impressed upon us the opportunities available to those who chose to take up Florence Nightingale's lamp and care for those who are ill or infirm. One of the stories was about a recent graduate from the college who who later packed up her life and moved on to Rochester, Minnesota in order to work for the world-famous Mayo Clinic. Having spent many summers in Minnesota on my grandfather's farm, I thought, well, that could be kind of cool. I filed that story in the back of my brain and got on with getting my degree. 3 years later, I'm a fresh-faced new nurse with a brand spanking new nursing degree, eager and excited to land that perfect new job. Unfortunately for me, I graduated when President and First Lady Bill and Hillary Clinton were trying and failing to bring universal health care to the United States. Hospitals and healthcare agencies were busy laying off nurses. I looked everywhere in California. No one was hiring. I think back to my professional practice class and the story about the woman who moved to Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic. On a whim, I go online. Yes, there was internet back then. It was just beginning, but it was a thing. And see if Mayo might be hiring nurses. And yes, they are. I submit an application and wait to hear back. Meanwhile, I realize I have to tell my wife, Karen, a California girl through and through, that her new husband is thinking about moving with her to this place in the Midwest known as Minnesota. Minnesota? Isn't that near Ohio? Luckily for me, Karen had just had a big fight with her parents about something. I don't remember what, and I don't particularly care. I just knew that it was the right time to ask her if she wouldn't mind living in a state other than California. We went to dinner at a local Mexican place. I gave her the opportunity to vent about her parents a little bit. You know, stoke the fires of anger burning in her soul. When her parental hostility reached a high point, I told her about my application to Mayo. Perfect timing. She exclaimed, "Yes," she exclaimed. "Let's move to Minnesota. It sounds fantastic. I have no clue where it is, but it's a great opportunity and we can live there for maybe 5 years." Well, 26 years later, here I am at First UU Rochester opening today's service. Karen and I came to Rochester where we have built a life raising 2 children and forging lives filled with joy, happiness, pain, sadness. It has most definitely been an adventure. This story is just one making up the narrative of my life. Like you, I have hundreds of little vignettes I could have shared. Some of my stories tell of my greatest joys, and others tell about the times my heart was broken. Some of them tell the stories of my moments of pure contentment, or other times, the times I experienced profound shame. Stories are what we use to make connections with one another. We look to stories to understand ourselves and to understand those around us. We look to stories to comprehend the question of the universe. Why are we here? What are we meant to do in this moment? How does your story and my story impact our lives, our families, our church, our community? This month, we're invited to explore our stories on a deep level, to learn more about ourselves and, if so inclined, make changes that can bring more joy to our lives and possibly make the world a little more hopeful.
Doom, 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 doom.
I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Yes, I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. You used You said you'd hold me till the pains of life were gone. You said you'd comfort me in times like these, and now I need you, and now I need you, and you are gone. So I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Since you've gone and left me, there's been so little beauty, but I know I saw it clearly through your eyes. Now the world outside is such a cold and bitter place. Here inside I have few things that will console. And when I try to hear your voice above the storms of life, then I remember that I was told. Yes, I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Yes, I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. I think on the things that made me feel so wonderful when I was young. I think on the things that made me laugh, made me dance, made me sing. I think on the things that made me grow into a being full of pride. Think on these things, for they are true. And I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. I thought that you were gone, but now I know you're with me. You are the voice that whispers, I need to hear. I know a please, a thank you, and a smile will take me far. I know that I am you, and you are me, and we are one. I know that who I am is numbered in each grain of sand. I know that I can know again and again and again and again. Yes, I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Yes, I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own
Have you ever come across something like a rock or an empty jar or, I don't know, a piece of paper and decided that, man, I bet you I could do something really great with this? You know, had a great idea? Well, that's what today's story is about. What do you do with an idea? Written by Kobe Yamada and illustrated by May Bessem. One day, I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? At first I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away and did not talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before my idea showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food. It wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people, even though I was afraid of what they would say. I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly. And many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea, I thought. No one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. So I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it good food, and I worked with it, I played with it, but most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew and grew, and so did my love for it. I built a new house, one with an open roof where it could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands because, it said, it is good to have the ability to see things differently. I could not imagine my life without it. Then one day, something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings, it took flight, and it burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. Sometimes it can be a little scary to share your ideas, especially if it's a little crazy or outside of the box. But sometimes, some very special times, those ideas can truly change the world.
I invite you to take a deep breath. Breathe deep the breath of life. Sit deeply in this community of love and justice, hope and grace. Know that here you are named and you are known as beloved, as sacred. I invite you into this time of prayer, first by sharing silence together. Spirit of life and source of love, earth below us with its ancient turning, sky above us with its ancient stars shining, God of 1,000 names and beyond all naming. This new world came whirling in, seeming to bring with it some wild ideas of staying put and staying in as we're able, of faces and voices only being known through the glow of modern gateways of connection, not something new, but now necessary in some new way. It has also come with wild ideas that we should adapt and create and become things and people in new ways at warp speed. But right now, I think, at least my soul needs a breath, a pause, a reminder that what we're able to do, to accomplish, to produce is good enough and more than good enough. And so for the weary soul and the tired eyes and the aching hearts, may we entertain the wild idea that taking a breath and setting some things aside, taking it slow, is good for our health and for our soul. It's good for each other. Help us slow down. We hold in our hearts this day all those who suffer in mind, in body or spirit. I invite you to bring the names you're holding in your own heart this day in joy or in sorrow, celebration or concern, and silently or loud now in this time to speak their names. For all those names, spoken and unspoken, may we be forever grateful for the fabric of love and life that weaves us together. May those threads hold us all in love and in strength. These words of meditation is a blessing for Mother's Day, entitled Praise Song for Mothers. Praise for the mothers, the fearless, the courageous, for down-to-earth wisdom and limitless compassion. Praise to birth mothers and adoptive mothers, surrogate mothers and mothers in spirit. Praise to the mother that is sleepless and swaying, reminding their child they are sacred and they should go to bed. Praise to the mother, the strong and courageous, reminding their child that women constantly recreate the world. Praise to the mother wise and uncertain, reminding their child that being human is not perfection but a process. Praise to the mother diligent and committed, reminding their child that being a mother means doing what you can, as you can by your means, that a limited life does not stop limitless love. Praise to the mothers who create the world every day, in the home, in the office, or the high-rise, on the construction site, in the boardroom, the classroom, the operating room, in the barracks, on the page, from the pulpit, all of which are now on a screen, between the notes, on the canvas, in the heart. Love for the mother who has lost the child. Love for the child who has lost the mother. Love for the women who have longed to be mothers, still in hope or letting go. Love for the women who are pressured to become mothers and choose not to, for they create the world in equal measure. Love to the daughters, the sons, the children with strained or tainted relationships with their own mothers. In the wider humanity, may there be healing. Praise to the strength of women creating and building up the world generation to generation. Praise and love to the mother of all, which holds us all. Amen.
Our first reading is Sledding in Wichita by Casey Picure. As cars passed, laboring through the slush, A boy, bundled against the stiff wind in his snowsuit, gloves, and scarf, leans on his upright toboggan, waiting his turn atop the snow-packed overpass, the highest point in town. First one car exits and then another, each creeping down the icy ramp. The brown grass pokes through the two grooves carved in the short hill. As the second car fishtails to the bottom, fishtails to a stop at the bottom, brake lights glowing on the dirty snow, the boy's turn comes. His trip to the bottom is swift, only a second or two, and he bails out just before the curb. It's not much, but it's sledding in Wichita. The second reading is a poem by Joy Harjo, Once the World Was Perfect. Once the world was perfect, and we were happy in the world. Then we took it for granted. Discontent began, a small rumble in the earthy mind. Then doubt pushed through its spiked head, and once doubt ruptured the web, all manner of demon thoughts jumped through. We destroyed the world we had been given for inspiration, for life. Each stone of jealousy, each stone of fear, greed, envy, and hatred put out the light. No one was without a stone in his or her hand. There we were, right back where we started. We were bumping into each other in the dark. And now we had no place to live since we didn't know how to live with each other. Then one of the stumbling ones took pity on another and shared a blanket. A spark of kindness made a light. The light made an opening in the darkness. Everyone worked together to make a ladder. A Wind Clan person climbed out first into the next world, and then the other clans, the children of those clans, their children and their children, all the way through time to now, into this morning light to you.
I can still remember the exact shelf it was on, if returned properly, there in the library at Monroe Elementary School. Through the doorway, to the left, past the little table over there with the globe on it, down on the right side, the very bottom shelf, just below the dusty sunlight through the windows at the top of the wall. 2 copies sometimes, but almost always just one, because I have always checked out the other one as often as I could. There on the shelf, The Polar Express. It was by far my favorite book as a child, and when it was recently made into a movie a few years back, my favorite way to read books, I was quite glad. I don't know how it started, my love of the images and the story, the magic that the words and the images held for me. It may have begun simply with a love of Christmas, one I particularly inherited from my grandmother, many of whose decorations will soon adorn our home in the coming season. But I went back to it again and again for its magic, for its familiarity, for the world it created for me. It was probably fitting that I skipped right past the globe on the table, holding the whole world, to go to the one spot, the familiar place, the familiar story, the tried and true story that I knew to be a place of comfort where I could dwell. Stories matter, writes Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Nigerian novelist, and especially known for her TED Talk about the danger of a single story. In that, she said, many stories matter. She said, stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. She said, stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. When we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story, she says, about any place, then we regain a kind of paradise. Now, the Polar Express isn't a bad story, but any story, especially those of the dominant culture, which it certainly is. When any story is believed to be the one, the only normative, fundamental story, well, that causes problems. It happens all the time, sometimes overt, hideous perpetuations of white supremacy or narratives of law and order or 1,000 other historic oppressions, and sometimes in covert ways, hiding beneath the surface. It's like the air we breathe. We can hardly realize sometimes or notice the stories that we tell as becoming what seems to us the only stories worth giving our attention. It has happened throughout history. Here, as we try to shore up our patriotism and civic duty to vote right on land that is stolen, built by slaves, rooted not only in personal biases, but also doctrinal writings like the doctrine of discovery, allowing Christians finding land from indigenous peoples to seize it and claim it as their own. We live within these competing realities of trying to love and work for a country that has never been just or equal, constantly failing to live up to its expressed and written ideals, or a view that ancient, or at least old texts can somehow be void of change, that the intention of the framers of the Constitution were somehow inerrant, as if they were perfect, as if their conflicting values of praising freedom while owning people somehow wasn't part of the words and the way that they put their values on paper. Originalism can make an idol of one document, one story, and the perspectives of only a certain group of people, in this case white men, which is often the case, that the world has long been in the clutches of. While I'm no scholar, I do know the Constitution itself has changed, especially during Reconstruction following the Civil War, with amendments to make at least a little more right what was certainly wrong. And heaven help us if we believed we have arrived now somehow, that we are done with our needed changes. We sure tell some tales, don't we? How often have we just kept going back to the same shelf, right past the globe, or right past the world? Who needs that? Of stories and histories and struggles and hopes, and find the story we know and just dwell there like a little idol on the bottom shelf. Not too long ago, a teacher of mine had us write down some truth of ours, or some value, or some word that resonated deeply with us, a truth about our life or our own story. So I wrote down, among many words, one word I wrote was home. So I thought about it, wrote it down. And then she said, all right, take your paper and hold it up and rip it in half. I was like, oh my gosh, this is intense. And then set it down, she said, and then write another truth. Well, now we knew what was going to happen, but we did it. We kept writing our truths, maybe each time a little more preciously, knowing its fragility. And throughout that process, it kept going and going. And then at the end, she had us paste it all together or tape it all together into something that kind of looked like this, where you have home, and in the middle of that you have love, in the middle of that you have hope, in the middle of that you have family, and 1,000 other meanings and deeper meanings beneath the words. What she wanted us to remember was that our own story, our own truths are always expanding, always need to be broken open when we think we've got it figured out, or there's only one part of our identity or one part of our story that matters, that it's always expanding, widening. We sure tell some tales, don't we? This is true among religious liberals often, that we've arrived somehow at the most evolved, thoughtful religion, that we've been at the forefront of justice and change for centuries. And there too, that story needs to be broken open again and again. That while we can celebrate some work that we have done and good things we have showed up for in good relationship building ways, still part of our story we must know is that many of our religious founders owned people. They owned black people, slaves, and argued for it. That Eliza Tupper Wilkes, of which we should celebrate regularly, was an anomaly in our tradition that didn't really respect and hardly ever ordained women or people of color or LGBTQI people until at least the last 50, 40 years in any regularity. And that in this very church, a former minister in this pulpit, or at least the pulpit of this congregation, at the height of the eugenics movement, vocalized his support broadly and publicly for a science based on bigotry. And it's not easy to know all the stories and to dig to find those stories. It's not easy for the soul to be aware of it sometimes in a culture and a society that prefers to live by single stories. But we know that stories at their best break open wider and wider to the world. That we begin to notice both the contradictions and the connections if we're really paying attention, listening deeply. That we begin to act on keeping the story wider and wider still, always questioning our assumptions, knowing that the story, like us, needs to and can change, both in the telling of it and in the listening to it, to what it means in a certain time and place, and how its themes do or don't change or grow or adapt to new people and places and moments. The impact of stories, both good and bad, linger. It's how things like white supremacy, transphobia, sexism, ageism, classism, and oppressions noticed and named, and those that aren't, keep showing up again and again. It's like the poet writes in today's reading about thistle. Unchecked, they write, it will sprawl over pasture and meadow, choking the sweet grass, defeating the clover. If, unthinking, you grasp it, you will need tweezers to pick out the stickers. They pop open, and parachutes carry their power to disparate venues, which is why there will always be thistle next year. Perhaps that sounds unhopeful. But perhaps in the work of justice. It's just true, which itself can never have a false absolutism either, that somehow we will figure everything out and the world will just be good and we can lay back and enjoy. That is a world built on stories, good or bad, beautiful, broken, all of which will always be part of our story. We can't ignore the histories and stories of oppression and genocide, the stories of hatred and despair when we've made a little progress in certain areas. And neither, if we give our attention to our ancestors, can we ignore the stories of liberation, the stories of resilience right alongside perseverance and widening of the heart and the soul to hold more stories than we knew we could. The ability to tell our own stories, writes Indian activist Arundhati Roy, different than the ones we're being brainwashed to believe. She says another world is not only possible, she is on her way, and on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. It takes some skill to give your attention to some being so devotedly to hear its breath. It takes some skill to pay attention to someone's story. The kind of skill that Stephanie and Alex shared about how to really listen to, attend to the soul of another human being, another being of any kind in this world, to honor their story different than your own and hear a different world breathing into being. What stories are we telling? And what stories are we breaking open with our vote, with our volunteering, with our everyday work of what we give our time and our attention and resources to? A colleague and activist, a friend of mine, has often said that voting and elections are primarily about harm reduction. This has been helpful framing to me for many reasons. It acknowledges that voting is really an act of faith, not being certain of what will come of it. And even if the vote goes the way of love and justice, it reminds us that elections do matter. They cause or they reduce harm. And at the same time, they do not eliminate all harm. We live in a world, one dominated for millennia by stories of empire, colonialism, of patriarchy and racism and heteronormativity. We know that one election can't, won't fix it, and yet we have to keep singing for our lives. These systems of oppression rise up like thistle right in the midst of this world. When you get close to them and threaten them, they sting hard. And those stories are still there. So perhaps the work now is not waiting for the moment when it's all fixed, but it's grabbing whatever tools we have or whatever tools we're able to learn, taking the stories that claim to be the only ones, the ones we're familiar with or too comfortable with as a world, and tearing them open, pushing them wider and wider still until the stories that have been pushed to the margins over and over come to the center. And from that place, we put the book back on the shelf. We back up from the familiar spot. We notice the globe behind us and our little spot, our little place on its turning surface. And we remember that this whole room, our whole lives, are filled with stories. To remember the world has more shelves, more books, more stories than we can possibly imagine. So what are the stories we're living? What are the ones we're telling? What are the ones we're giving our attention to, deeply listening to? What are the ones we're retweeting or sharing or learning from? And from the story being broken open and widened, who do you include when you say we? And what is that story calling us to do next? gather the people. Give them not hell, but courage and hope. Give them something of the love you have found here, and tell all the people that love is our hope.